All right, together again. Welcome. It is Tuesday, the 6th of October, and we're on session 16, part 2. Um, and we're talking about text dependent questions. So, your I can statement today, ladies and gentlemen, is I can write a text dependent question. Pretty simple, right? We're going to be using the text Paul Revere's Ride. And I'm going to let you know ahead of time it is a poem. It is an old poem. It is more than 100 years old. It is considered a classic poem and it's very long. We will be dealing with a part of it today. And some of you may struggle with the language, but we'll get through that together. I know it's a little difficult for you, and some of you think you don't like poetry, but you actually do. It's just certain kinds of poetry you don't like. So we will get through this together, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to teach you today how a good reader can become a good analyst. And what that means is you are able to really look closely at what you've read, and you are able to take the important pieces of it and build a case about what it's about or what information they're trying to give you. You can create good text dependent questions because you understand the reading. And if you can do that, that's all you need. Once you can write good text dependent questions, you will be able to understand completely what you've read. So it's not just creating those questions for someone else, but because you're building those questions on your own, instead of waiting for me to give you questions to answer, you're really digging into that text and you're really looking closely at the material. So let's talk about the fine art of forming text dependent questions. As we know from yesterday, a text dependent question specifically asks a question that can only be answered by referring explicitly back to the text being read. Well, there's a lot of text dependence and texts going on there, but what it means is you can't answer the question accurately if you don't use the text to respond. If you remember yesterday when we looked at that Powtoon, and questions were like, what do you like to do for your birthday? Or have you ever done something nice for a family member on their birthday? Had nothing to do with the text, which did in fact involve some birthday items. Um, but the questions did not refer you back to those items in the grocery cart. So today we're going to load up our grocery cart with the Revolutionary War. The first thing I want you to do is bring up your copy of Paul Revere's Ride and split your screen so that you can see both this presentation and the poem. Okay, have you got your copies up? I want you to be able to see the poem as I'm reading it, and then we will look at how we write these questions. So, Paul Revere's Ride was written by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, and he lived in the 1800s, but of course, he was writing about the Revolutionary War, which, of course, we all know was in the late 1700s. I hope we all know that. Please tell me we all know that. All right, so I'm going to read a little bit, we're going to talk a little bit, and I want you to follow along. You should have the poem in front of you, and you should be able to pay close attention. You can highlight on your on your copy if you want to. You can take notes, whatever you need to remember what's really important. And rather than read through the entire poem, which normally is what you should do, I'm going to chunk it out for you like we do, and we'll read little parts at a time so that we can actually look closely at what we're reading. So here we go. Paul Revere's Ride. Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere. On the 18th day of April in 75, hardly a man is now alive who remembers that famous day and year. He said to his friend, if the British march by land or sea from the town tonight, hang a lantern aloft in the belfry arch of the North Church Towery as a signal light. One if by land, and two if by sea. And I on the opposite shore will be ready to ride and spread the alarm through every Middlesex village and farm for the country folks to be up and to arm. So I'm going to stop right there because there are a few things we need to look at. I want you to think about what's happening. When he says, Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere, that's a very famous line. And all it's saying is, I'm going to tell you about Paul Revere's ride. Now, when you read a poem, it's best to annotate as you go and translate the poem into what you understand it to be. So, in this first stanza, he talks about the ride, he talks about when it happened, and he says that it happened a while back, and the people who were involved in it are probably all dead now. That's all that first stanza means. In the second stanza, he says that he said to his friend, if the British march by land or from by sea, he's telling his friend, I want you to start watching and let me know if the British come. And if they come by land, you're going to tell me one way. And if they come by sea, you're going to tell me another way. And the way you're going to do that is to shine a lantern and flash lights at me. One time if they come by land, and two times if they come by sea. And I'm going to be on the other side of the bay, ready to go tell everyone that they're coming so that we can be armed and prepared to fight the British off. Remember, this is the Revolutionary War, and the United States, well, it wasn't the United States then, but this country was trying to separate itself from England. So then he'll go on. Then he said good night, and with muffled oar silently rowed to the Charleston shore. Just as the moon rose over the bay, where swinging wide at her mornings lay the Somerset British man of war, a phantom ship, with each mast and spar across the moon like a prison bar, and a huge black hulk that was magnified by its own reflection in the tide. Meanwhile, his friend, through alley and street, wanders and watches with eager ears till in the silence around him he hears the muster of men and at the barracks door, the sound of arms and the tramp of feet and the measured tread of the grenadiers' feet, marching down to their boats on the shore. All right, so let's stop again. There was a lot there, so let's look at it. He said to his friend to come down and let me know. As soon as you know which way the British are coming, you let me know. So then he says goodnight to his friend and he gets in his little rowboat and he rows across the bay and he ends up in Charleston. Not our Charleston, this is in Massachusetts. And just as the moon is going over the bay, he starts to hear something happening and he sees a ship in a big dark shadow. And then he looks across the hulk of it and he sees his own reflection in the tide. So the water is calm and he sees his reflection. And as he's going across and he sees that ship, we switch back over to his friend. It says, meanwhile, his friend through alley and street wanders and watches with eager ears till in the silence around him he hears the muster of men at the barrack door. So now his friend is listening and looking and waiting. And what does he know? What does he hear? Well, here's what he hears. He hears the sound of men inside the barracks and the sound of them loading up their guns and their feet tramping on the ground. And the people are marching down to the boats on the shore. So right now, Paul Revere is rowing his boat across to the other side of the bay. He sees a ship, but he doesn't know anything about it. And in the meantime, his friend is standing by on the shore, paying attention, watching and waiting, and listening. And he hears these soldiers getting ready. So I'm going to stop right there for a minute because we've got plenty of material to work with. And I want you to think about a couple of things. I want you to go back to lines 1 through 24, which is the first three stanzas plus the two lines below it. And I'm going to ask you in line 6 and 24, not 6 through 24, line 6 and line 24. Longfellow mentions Paul Revere's friend. Who is this friend? And what is his role in the poem? Why is his friend even in the poem? What's so important about his friend? I want you to think about that for a moment. I have blacked out that part of your paper because you don't need to answer that on paper. We're going to talk about it. In class, we'll be discussing it. Right now, we clearly can't because you're not here. So, I'm going to tell you. His friend is the person that is assigned to signal Paul Revere. So he's letting him know if and how the British are coming by hanging a lantern on the belfry, one if by land and two if by sea. That line comes from line 10 of the poem. See how it refers directly back to what you read in the poem. That's what we're looking for. Text-based evidence. They even indicated the line when they said one if by land, two if by sea, line 10. So let's go on to another question. And if you look at lines 12 through 14, so 12, 13, 14, find those and tell me what is the purpose of Paul Revere's ride? What is he going to do? So look at lines 12, 13, and 14. Ready to ride and spread the alarm through every Middlesex village and farm for the country folk to be up and to arm. So what is it that he's trying to do? Why is he even doing this ride? Did he just feel like going down to the local pub? Was he just taking his horse out on a spin? Or was he spreading the alarm to tell the villagers to get their weapons ready because the British are coming? The British are coming. All right, let's look at the next part, lines 15 through 23. It's really 24. Describe what's happening in these lines and what that tells us about Paul Revere. So let's look back at lines 15 through 24. Then he said good night and with a muffled oar silently rowed to the Charleston shore. So the oars are in the water and he's rowing very carefully and silently across the bay to the shore. Just as the moon rose over the bay where swinging wide at her mornings lay the Somerset, British man of war. The Somerset is the name of the British warship. A phantom ship with each mast and spar across the moon like a prison bar, and a huge black hulk that was magnified by its own reflection in the tide. So it looked even bigger in its reflection. But this ship is designed to be stealth. This is one of the first stealth weapons that we ever saw. It was painted all black so people couldn't see it in the night as it was coming into the bay. The British were smart. They thought about this. And meanwhile, his friend through alley and street wanders and watches with eager ears. So, as Paul Revere is going back across the bay to prepare everyone, he sees the ship and his friend is watching and waiting on the other side. So, if we ask you to describe what's happening, he's rowing across the water right next to the ship that is full of British soldiers. He muffles his oars so they won't hear him. Remember, he's going very quietly. The British ship is huge, and he's in a rowboat. They could just plow right over him. And it tells us that Paul Revere is brave, he's courageous. Because despite the danger that's coming, he's determined to notify the villagers and help his countrymen fight against the British. In line 25 of the poem, it says that the friend wanders and watches with eager ears. What's he listening for? What does he hear? And what is the result? Well, he watches and wonders with eager ears till the silence around him he hears the muster of men at the barracks door. So he's waiting for any sign of the British. And he hears the muster of men. Notice that that's a direct quote from the poem, text dependent. The result is that he sees the line of British ships and lights the warning sign. So he sees those ships and he goes to light the lantern to warn Paul Revere. So, see, it's really not that difficult. If you really break it down, sometimes we try to read the whole poem and try to understand it all at once. And I keep telling you, it's so much easier to chunk things out. It doesn't matter what you're reading. Read little bits at a time and make notes. Make notes about what you understand. Make notes about what you don't understand. It's so important. Make sure you're using your context clues. If you don't understand what something means, you need to try to figure it out. Because if you just go on without figuring it out, you will not have a clear understanding of what you've read. So read it carefully, read it slowly, and guess what time it is, ladies and gentlemen? It's time for you to try this on your own. So you're going to read the next two stanzas, and you're going to create text-dependent questions for each one. So that means you're only writing two questions today. So they better be good. Once you do that, you must respond using specific references to the text and in complete sentences. So once you write the question, you have to write the answer. Because if you're going to give an assessment to somebody, you have to have the answers before they take the assessment, right? Or otherwise, how are you going to know how to assess it? So write your questions. Remember those text dependent question stems that I gave you yesterday. You do not have to use those, but they're there if you need them. So if you have any questions, you know how to contact me. This is a hardy assignment, even though it's only writing two questions and it's only reading two stanzas. If you get interested in the poem, read to the end. It really is quite a good poem. And I will talk to you later, ladies and gentlemen. Have a great day.